Alexander Mercouris via London, where, believe it or not, we do have some Fusion GPS Dossier, Steele Dossier news to report from London, which a lot of our viewers may not know of. Mr. MI6 spy Christopher Steele, or former MI6 spy Christopher Steele, has not disappeared. He is in London, and he is singing. He is talking about what's going on with his dossier. And we also have a lot of news breaking in the U.S. We had a Comey testimony in front of Congress. We also had a Flynn sentencing, which took a very bizarre, shocking turn yesterday in that it was delayed. His sentencing was delayed. I don't know if that's good or bad for Flynn, if it's good or bad for Mueller. Alexander, you're gonna tell us what you think of the sentencing. Bring it all together, wrap it up in what has been a very, very busy past couple of days with regard to the Trump-Russia collusion hoax. I continue to call it a hoax. I think this video will conclusively state and conclusively lead to the fact that it is indeed a hoax. But Alexander, take it away and give us your insight as to what's been going on these three fronts.
Right. First of all, Alex, you're absolutely right to call it a hoax, because now we've got enough information coming out of the Mueller investigation, out of the Mueller inquiry itself, to be able to say conclusively that it is a hoax. Now, the reason I say it is a hoax is because the document, or rather series of documents, which first established the theory that there'd been a collusion, a conspiracy between Donald Trump and his campaign and the Russians to steal this election, the 2016 election from Hillary Clinton, was this dossier that was produced by Christopher Steele. Now, over the last few weeks, and it's not been reported properly, we have got a lot more information about that dossier. Firstly, coming back to the case which you were talking about, coming back to Christopher Steele himself, he is involved in a big court case in London where some of the people who were named in the dossier and say that they had absolutely nothing to do with any of the things that he alleges in the dossier that they did do. These are Russian businessmen. They are suing him in libel, and he is forced to come out and make more and more disclosures over the course of those proceedings about the dossier itself. The first thing we've learned is that the dossier was, in fact, commissioned entirely by Fusion GPS on behalf of the Democrats in order to help Hillary Clinton in the campaign and to make it easier for Hillary Clinton, if she lost the election, to challenge the outcome.
Huge news.
Huge news. And it seems that it has been conclusively established that the entirety of the money for the dossier came from Fusion GPS, from the Democrats, and from Hillary Clinton. Now, I say that because James Comey, who was the former head of the FBI, who started this whole Russiagate investigation, he is continuing to claim, and he actually claimed it again in the House of Representatives during that testimony that he gave a short time ago. He is continuing to claim that originally Steele was commissioned by some Republicans to investigate Trump. Now, we know now that that is not really true, in that though there was an investigation of Trump by Republicans, that ended in April 2016, and it had no connection whatsoever with the creation of the dossier. That is the first thing. Now, the second thing that we have learned, and this comes directly from Robert Mueller's investigations of Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen, is that the dossier itself is untrue. We now know conclusively that Michael Cohen did not visit and meet Russian operatives in Prague, as the dossier says. And we also know that Paul Manafort had none of the connections with the Russians that the dossier alleges that he did. Now, I say that because, of course, the dossier makes all of those allegations, but the sentencing memos of Cohen and Manafort, which have been put together by Mueller's team, make no reference to these claims, and it is now accepted that they are untrue. Moreover, we have learned that the Washington Post was being told by various people within the security services, within the intelligence community, that the Cohen allegation, specifically about this Cohen meeting in Prague, that was untrue. And the Washington Post, it seems, didn't report it. So that, it seems to me, is big news because, as I said, it turns out that the Trump dossier, the Steele dossier, the foundation document for the whole conspiracy case, the whole collusion case, it turns out is false. And that, it seems to me, basically destroys the collusion case. So when you said at the beginning that it was a hoax, we can say definitely now, without any doubt, that it was a hoax. Mueller himself has proved it.
All right, tie this into Flynn now because we had the Flynn sentencing. And I want to stress that, to me, Flynn's sentencing, his whole trial, has nothing to do with Russia whatsoever. All I hear is the Farah Act and Turkey.
You're absolutely right. Now, there's two points about Flynn. First of all, Flynn did have some contacts with the Russians. He had contact with the Russian ambassador. That's entirely legal and above board behavior. And he did nothing wrong. It is now universally accepted that he did nothing wrong or illegal in the conversations with the Russian ambassador that he did have. Now, what happened is that he was then interviewed by Peter Strzok, a person we've heard about an awful lot in this case, and a colleague from his in the FBI. The instigation, it turns out, of Comey and McCabe, who were trying, I think, to trick him into some kind of admission that would lead to a prosecution under the Logan Act, this bizarre act that has existed for 200 years, which nobody has brought any claims, prosecutions against, and which the former Attorney General Sally Yates was trying to sort of conjure up into something important. And on the basis of that conversation, he was charged with and admitted to the process crime of lying to the FBI, not about the fact that he had conversations with the Russian ambassador, but about some of the things that he said to the Russian ambassador over the course of those conversations. That is the only thing, that is the only crime that Flynn has admitted to. The other crimes that he has been charged with, that he was charged with, and which have been dropped, is that he acted as an agent for the Turkish government. Now, that without registration, without registering himself as a foreign agent under the FARA law. Now, that is a much more serious crime, but that charge was basically dropped against him because he came to this deal with Mueller in which he offered to cooperate with Mueller. Now, that absolutely shocking sentencing hearing had the judge, who clearly didn't understand the case very well, somehow thinking that Flynn was still a foreign agent for the Turkish government, whilst he was a national security advisor and working in the White House as Donald Trump's national security advisor, which is not true, and insinuating that was in some way a treason, which again is not true. I mean, it was absolutely bizarre, and I have to say, so bizarre and so biased and so critical of Flynn that I have to wonder whether this judge is really Judge Sullivan is really an appropriate person now to sentence him. Now, there's lots of speculation about what this is all about. It could be that it was intended to buy Mueller more time to keep this investigation going because the sentencing has now been postponed for 3 months. Or it could be because the judge himself was so embarrassed by this extraordinary thing that he did that he felt that he had to postpone the hearing, because for him to have gone ahead and sentenced Flynn after making such a grotesque mistake might have exposed him to some kind of appeal process. I don't know. I personally favour the first option, that it was he's mainly intended to keep this Russiagate investigation alive by feeding ideas that Flynn has some great, further information to give to Mueller, which simply isn't true. Because, as you rightly say, the case against him is mainly about Turkey. It's got nothing to do with Russia at all.
That would mean that the judge, in some form or another, is in on it with Mueller.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I don't mean that there was active collusion between the judge and Mueller, in the sense that I don't think there's been secret communications. But I think what probably happened is that the prosecutors, Mueller's representatives, and the judge, who's clearly hostile to Flynn, communicated to each other in the courtroom in some form. And as I said, this is why the thing was set up in that kind of way. Whatever it was awful. I mean, it was horrible, and it was wholly wrong. And I personally think that judge should no longer be involved in the sentencing of Flynn, because, as I said, he has shown extreme bias and a complete failure to understand the case itself.
So this 3 months, this is bad for Flynn, or is this good for Flynn? Is this going to mean that he's going to have 3 months of being grilled by Mueller, or does this mean he's going to have 3 more months where more truths, more things are revealed?
I think we'll have to wait and see. But if I have to make a guess, I think it's probably good for Flynn, in the sense that if Flynn had been sentenced by that judge, then I suspect, given how hostile the judge is to Flynn, he would have ended up with a much higher sentence than he deserves. In fact, in my opinion, he shouldn't be sentenced at all, because in my opinion, this prosecution should never have been brought. I mean, he did absolutely nothing wrong by speaking to the Russian ambassador. He wasn't given his Miranda rights when he was interviewed by the FBI. I don't think he deceived the FBI in any serious way, given that what he said to the Russian ambassador was completely innocuous and entirely lawful. And as for the violation of FARA, the actual violation is a technical one, because in fact Flynn did register, but not apparently in the correct or appropriate way. So I think the whole case against Flynn is a nonsense, and I don't think he should have been prosecuted. And Mueller himself is admitting that he shouldn't be sent to prison at all, and I don't think he should be.
All right, so we know that the dossier was the basis for all the spying, for the FISA warrants, in order to spy on people like Carter Page, whose life was subsequently ruined, or Papadopoulos as well, Manafort even. All these people were spied on because of a fictitious dossier, which Steele has now admitted is fictitious.
Yes.
How severe is Steele's predicament in the UK, legally speaking? Is this guy in big trouble under UK law? And then take it to the other side of Comey and all these guys that were using this fake document to spy on all these people, and eventually, I guess it's safe to say, to bring down the elected president of the United States. That's in essence what they were doing.
Defamation law, libel law in Britain is extremely complicated, and I'm afraid one cannot give any straightforward views about this case. I mean, even if that dossier is in a complete load of fictions, if Steele had good reason to believe it was true, especially given that it was being provided confidentially to someone and was not intended for wide publication, he may have a defense. I want to stress may, because I don't know. And I suspect that there's an awful lot more coming out of the libel case than we are going to find out until we know what the final decision is. But let's not dwell too much on the libel case, because, I mean, it's useful in getting, as I said, information out of Steele. What is much more important to me is what that dossier was used for. Firstly, it was used by the Democrats both during the 2016 election and after it to discredit Trump and his campaign, and to suggest that they were involved in some kind of collusion with the Russians, and that the Russians were blackmailing Trump because of the salacious allegations that, the golden showers that were supposed to have happened in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. That is already very, very bad. The second thing is that, of course, it was used by a group of people within the US intelligence community, within the FBI, the Justice Department, and the CIA to open up investigations of Trump and of his campaign, and, as you correctly say, Alex, to obtain these unlawful FISA warrants against people like Carter Page. And last but not least, of course, it was then used subsequently, after it was published, to discredit Donald Trump. And in that incredible meeting that happened between Donald Trump and James Comey just before Trump was inaugurated president, to put pressure on Trump in a way which Trump himself apparently sees as an attempt to blackmail him. So it is an extraordinary document. Now we know for a fact that it is untrue. And it is incredible that nobody is admitting to this, that nobody is publicly admitting to this, given how important this dossier was. We've not had a formal admission from the FBI, from Mueller, from the CIA, from British intelligence, who also seem to have plugged this thing, that this thing is a load of fiction. And that is extraordinary. Nor are we seeing it coming out of the media, The Guardian in Britain, the New York Times, the Washington Post, all of which ran with this dossier, with BuzzFeed, which of course published it. None of them are coming forward and saying this dossier has been proved to have been untrue, and the foundation text of the whole collusion case has collapsed. None of them are saying it. Now, can I say something? I, of course, when I read the Trump dossier, and you can verify this because I've written articles about this on the Duran, the moment I saw it, because I know a little bit about how things happen in Russia, knew this dossier had to be untrue. But the FBI should have known, even if they didn't know very much about Russia, they should have known very quickly that it wasn't untrue. Because the two people who actually did have contacts with Russians, who were Michael Flynn, who was having these perfectly lawful meetings with the Russian ambassador, and George Papadopoulos, who was having meetings which were also perfectly lawful with various Russian contacts in the Valdai Club, as a result of what was probably a provocation, because he seems to be instigated to do into these contacts by this man called Mifsud, this Joseph Mifsud character, this so-called professor, who has disappeared, but who may have been a British agent. These two people, Papadopoulos and Flynn, who actually had contacts with the Russians and who the FBI knew had contacts with the Russians, are not actually mentioned in the Trump dossier. So we have a situation where the FBI was running with a dossier that made allegations against people like Cohen and Manafort, and claimed that they had contacts with the Russians, which they didn't have. And it ignored those people like Flynn and Papadopoulos. And I forgot to mention also Donald Trump Jr., who met the Russian lawyer, what was her name, Veselnitskaya, who actually did have contacts. So it's quite clear that whoever wrote that dossier had no access to secret information in Russia at all. And the FBI should have known that right from the start.
Isn't there a paper trail for the FBI to verify stuff like this? I mean, there is. And even Comey has said that they didn't properly verify the document, the dossier, but yet it was used, and it is still being used to this very day, used against the president of the United States. And they're using it to take down Trump. And you have this whole Mueller investigation constructed around a dossier that Steele himself has now said is completely false. And you have people, Alexander, Loretta, I wrote it down, Lynch, Rice, Abedin, Sally Yates, Peter Strzok, James Comey, McCabe, all these people seem to all be in on this. Is this possible? Has this been one big coordinated insurance policy to either A, safeguard the election of Hillary Clinton, or B, in the off chance that a wild card like Donald Trump becomes president of the United States, will drop this Russia conspiracy and we will slow walk a coup d'etat against the elected president of the U.S. Is this, am I thinking way too conspiracy, or is this really a fact? Let's not forget a tarmac meeting between Bill Clinton and Lynch in Arizona, which to this date, everyone has seemed to have forgotten.
Well, you're quite right. And can I just say, I mean, it's not too far-fetched because, of course, that's what Christopher Steele is now saying in the court proceedings in London. He is saying that the dossier was produced in part, or rather in order to enable Hillary Clinton to challenge the legitimacy of Donald Trump's election in the event that he won the election. And that is exactly how it was used. It was used to carry out, to justify illegal surveillance, what would otherwise have been illegal surveillance of Donald Trump's campaign people. It was used, as you correctly say, to discredit Donald Trump and his campaign during the election. And of course, it has provided the frame narrative. And by the way, I use that expression, the frame narrative, because it was the BBC and Adam Schiff, the Democrat, the senior Democrat in the House Intelligence Committee, who actually, I think, used that expression. I mean, they said it provided the frame narrative for the whole Russiagate investigation. And what has happened? That document, that foundation document, has collapsed. Its credibility is now destroyed. We can now, as I said, after the completion of the cases against Manafort and Cohen, definitely say it is untrue. And yet, none of the people who are implicated in using it and who have launched this investigation on the strength of it have so far faced any kind of concerted criticism or investigation at all. And can I say again, that is the real scandal of the 2016 election. That is what I have been saying ever since March of 2017, March of last year. That is the real scandal, that this utterly ridiculous document, this obvious, grotesque fake, could have been used in that way, could have been used to launch an investigation of this kind, and that investigation could have continued for more than 2 years and is still continuing, even long after it has been proved to be the fake it obviously was, and which anybody reading it should have been able to see right from the start.
I mean, this is the narrative of the Russian meddling is not what, the left is talking about, the dismantling of U.S. democracy. It's not the Russian meddling. I think it was, and I go back to an article that you wrote in October of 2016.
16, before the election.
Yeah, it's that Hillary Clinton somehow got together with Podesta and Mook and all these guys, and they advised her, and the strategy was to drop this bomb on the Trump campaign, this Russian collusion bomb based on this dossier. That's what's undermined American democracy.
Absolutely. And can I just add another factor, which is, of course, the other thing that they did, was that To this day, we don't know who it was, but someone within the Obama administration in the months leading up to Donald Trump's inauguration, after the election itself, they made the situation worse by unmasking people. In other words, by leaving information all over the whole security, intelligence, White House bureaucracy, which pointed directly at various people who, within the Trump campaign or who were associated with the Trump campaign, who could therefore be identified clearly as being involved in this kind of, the so-called conspiracy with the Russians, which never existed. That was wrong when it happened. We can see that it is even more wrong now, and it was clearly intended to undermine Donald Trump's legitimacy as president of the United States, and that was done after he had already won the election.
Yeah, it seems that everyone was so properly placed in the right position to take down Trump the minute Trump had beaten Hillary Clinton. From Rosenstein being at the DOJ to Sessions recusing himself to Comey, sparking the Mueller investigation by leaking the information to his friend, knowing that it would be Mueller then who would come in and investigate, who's a friend of Comey's.
Brennan in the CIA.
To Brennan, the coincidences are too much.
Well, they're not coincidences. I mean, this is clearly. I have no doubt about this. I mean, one should be careful talking about conspiracy theories, but sometimes conspiracies actually do happen in real life, and I think here one is looking, if not exactly at a conspiracy, at least in a concerted campaign in which all of these people were involved. I mean, when you hear about unmasking, when you see things like the Trump dossier being used in the way that it was used to carry out illegal surveillance on people, when we see attempts like the one I spoke about to provoke George Papadopoulos into contacts with the Russians in order to get him to do incriminating things, which of course he never did. When you see attempts like the one that happened to misuse entirely lawful conversations that Michael Flynn had with the Russian ambassador and to illegally leak the information about those conversations obtained through classified recordings of those conversations, which is a federal offence. When you see all of that going on, you cannot talk about anything else other than, at the very least, a concerted campaign, if not a conspiracy. Personally, I prefer to use the word conspiracy because that seems to me the right word to use in this kind of context. I don't mean that they all got together in a room and plotted it all together, but somehow they were all involved with each other and they all knew to a great extent what they were doing.
No, I think all the pieces were in place. Everyone was in their positions in high places in the government, and they needed that document, that piece of evidence that they could throw into the public arena, that they could get the ball rolling. And to me, it seems that it was that dossier that they said, okay, this is what we're going to base everything on, is this dossier. Now let's go.
And Christopher Steele is now essentially saying that. I mean, he's basically saying the purpose of the dossier was to undermine the legitimacy of Donald Trump's election. And we also know, because of course we know this from the investigations that had been taken, that the House Intelligence Committee, when it was led by the Republicans, carried out, that Christopher Steele was rabidly anti-Trump, and that the FBI knew that fact, and that they worked with him, and that they continued to work with him even after they formally sacked him for talking to the media, and that they set up this very complicated arrangement through Brussels to enable them to continue this communication with him.
Yeah, Brussels, another name. And to me, it's if the Democrats would rig an election against their own party member in Bernie Sanders during the primary, why would they not have a contingency plan to rig the U.S. presidential election And to me, it makes perfect sense that they would have some sort of scheme already set up to ensure, once again, that Hillary Clinton would be sitting in the Oval Office.
Well, to answer your question, which I take as a rhetorical question, if the Democrats are capable of rigging their primaries in order to stop Bernie Sanders,
which they
did. We know for a fact that they did. And people always seem to forget this because, of course, this is where it all began. It began with the fact that, the WikiLeaks, the emails that were taken from the DNC proved that. If the Democrats were capable of doing that, they were absolutely capable of concocting a story about Donald Trump being in bed with the Russians. And that's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any question about this. That was what GPS was for. That's what Christopher Steele was paid to do. And he did it. And to a great extent, one has to say this, it worked. I mean, we've had 2 years now of an investigation into something that was obvious nonsense and which should have been seen as obvious nonsense from the start. But it created a hysterical atmosphere, which has hobbled Donald Trump's presidency, undermined his legitimacy, prevented him from acting on his initial plan for improving relations with Russia, managed to get his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, sacked and disgraced. And, of course, we're still paying the price of it now.
Yeah, I mean, CNN, major news outlets, they all passed on the dossier multiple times. Why did BuzzFeed at that point in time figure that, hey, this is a good document that we can now throw into the public square? There's something deeper at play in all of this.
Well, of course. I mean, you said it. You're absolutely right. I mean, that was the real scandal. I come back to this. That is the real scandal of the 2016 campaign, that the intelligence services of the United States threw their weight behind one of the candidates in the election, Hillary Clinton, in order to prevent the election of another, using a ridiculous document like the Trump dossier in order to justify doing so. And they continue to work to undermine Donald Trump as the elected president of the United States after his election.
2 years in, and we're still talking about this. It's incredible.
Well, indeed. I do think we're coming to the end of the road of this now, because if we come back to what I was saying at the start, Mueller has gone through all of the people who were involved in the Trump dossier. He's put Manafort through the third degree. The Manafort case has proved that Manafort was not involved in the Trump dossier in the way that the dossier said. He's done the same with Michael Cohen, and we've seen that Michael Cohen, the case against Cohen, has proved also that the Trump dossier is not true. What does Mueller have left? I don't think he's got very much. And if I can say, that's why I have my suspicions about the Flynn sentencing memo, the Flynn sentencing episode that has just happened with the delay of 3 months, because that does seem to me to be an effort by Mueller to keep something going with Flynn for another 3 months to conceal the fact that he's actually run out of road.
Incredible story. An incredible story that hopefully it is coming to an end, but I think we still have now another 3 months. Thank you to Judge Sullivan on that one. All right, Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button. Click that notifications bell. Go to the Duran shop, 20% off all through December. And remember to donate to our PayPal and Patreon page. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Until next time, everybody, take care.